In the spring of 1941, the name Rommel felt like a death sentence. The Desert Fox had just arrived in North Africa, and in a whirlwind of dust and steel, he had sent the British forces reeling back toward the Egyptian border. He was the master of the Blitzkrieg, a general who didn't just win battles, he broke spirits. Rommel's next target was a dusty, sun-bleached port town called Tobruk. He expected it to fall in a day. He expected a disorganized retreat. What he found instead was a former schoolteacher from Australia named Leslie Morshead. Morshead didn't care about Rommel's reputation. He didn't believe in holding a line. He believed in making the enemy bleed for every single inch of it. This is the tactical story of Ming the Merciless, and the siege that changed the war. This is the story of how a group of amateur soldiers, mocked by German propaganda as rats, became the first force in World War II to stop the Nazi war machine in its tracks. To understand Tobruk, you have to understand the Benghazi Handicap. That's what the British called their chaotic retreat across the desert in early 1941. Rommel had arrived with the Afrika Korps and completely upended the strategic map. The British were exhausted, their equipment was breaking down, and they were running for their lives. But Tobruk was different. It was a deep water port. If Rommel didn't capture it, his supply lines would stretch over 600 miles back to Tripoli. Every mile his tanks drove toward Cairo, they would be vulnerable to a thorn in the side from Tobruk. The task of holding this thorn fell to the 9th Australian Division, led by Major General Leslie Morshead. Morshead was a civilian soldier, a man who had spent the interwar years as a schoolmaster. But don't let the resume fool you. His men called him Ming the Merciless. He was a strict, cold, and meticulously detailed commander who realized that in the desert, morale is just as important as ammunition. As the German Panzers surrounded the city on April 10, cutting it off from the rest of the British Army, Morshead issued a simple, chilling order. There will be no surrender, and no retreat. The first thing Morshead did was fix the geography. Tobruk already had an old Italian-built perimeter, but it was in shambles, filled with sand and neglected. Morshead didn't just fix the holes. He changed the philosophy of the defense. Most commanders tried to hold a thin crust of a line. If the enemy breaks that crust, the defense collapses. Morshead built depth. He created a system of staggered concrete line pits. From the air, it looked like a honeycomb. These weren't just trenches. They were posts. Each post had interlocking fields of fire. This meant that if a German squad tried to attack Post A, they would be hit in the flank by machine guns from Post B and Post C. He also utilized dead ground, those dips in the desert floor where a tank might feel safe from view. Morshead placed anti-tank guns specifically to cover these blind spots. He wasn't trying to block the Germans. He was trying to channel them into killing zones. Most sieges involved the defenders hiding behind walls while the attackers roamed free outside. Morshead hated that. He told his men, "We are not being besieged. We are holding a position from which we will strike." This was the birth of aggressive patrolling. Every single night, Australian bushmen would crawl out into no man's land. They didn't just scout, they hunted. They would sneak into German trenches, steal equipment, sabotage tanks, and vanish before the enemy could fire a shot. German radio propaganda tried to mock them, calling them the rats of Tobruk, implying they were trapped in holes. The Australians loved it. They made their own rat medals out of scrap metal from downed German planes. This was psychological warfare at its finest. By owning the night, the Australians made the Afrika Korps feel like they were the ones who were trapped. Rommel's diaries from this period are filled with frustration. He couldn't understand why his invincible troops were being terrorized by men who were supposed to be starving and exhausted. The ultimate test came between April 10th and 14th, 1941, the Easter Battle. Rommel, impatient as ever, ordered a direct tank assault on the southern sector of the perimeter. He used the classic Blitzkrieg formula: tanks lead, infantry follows. But Morshead had a surprise. He told his front-line infantry, "Let the tanks through." Imagine the nerves required for that. You're in a hole, and a 20-ton Panzer Mark III is rumbling over your head. But the Australians stayed down. As the German tanks moved past the first line, thinking they had broken the defense, the Australians rose up and opened fire on the infantry following behind the tanks. Without infantry support, the German tanks were blind and vulnerable. They found themselves in a salient, a pocket surrounded by Australian anti-tank guns. It was a massacre. Out of 38 German tanks that entered the perimeter, 17 were destroyed in minutes. The rest fled. Rommel was stunned. It was his first major defeat in the desert. He realized he wasn't fighting rats. He was fighting a sophisticated, elastic defense that he simply didn't know how to crack. The siege of Tobruk lasted 242 days. It didn't just save Egypt, it changed the way the Allies fought the war. The first tactical lesson is elasticity. Morshead proved that a defense shouldn't be a wall, it should be a sponge. It absorbs the blow, traps the enemy inside its structure, and then squeezes. The second lesson is about morale as a multiplier. Morshed's strictness, his Ming the Merciless persona, created a culture of elite discipline. He took amateur soldiers and turned them into a force that believed they were superior to the best the Wehrmacht had to offer. In a siege, your mind usually breaks before your body. Morshead made sure their minds were iron. Strategically, Tobruk was the first time the German ground forces were decisively stopped in a prolonged engagement. It shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility, and gave the British Empire the breathing room it needed to rebuild its strength for the later battles at El Alamein. Leslie Morshead returned to his quiet life after the war, but his legacy remains etched in the sands of Libya. He was the man who looked at the desert fox and didn't blink. He taught the world that a well-prepared defense, led by a commander with a no-retreat mindset, can overcome even the most modern and aggressive offensive. Rommel might have been the fox, but Morshead was the one who built the trap. And the rats? They proved that sometimes, the best way to survive is to bite back. This has been the story of Leslie Morshead, the Rats of Tobruk, and the siege that stopped the unstoppable.